Hi there. Good morning, everybody. So we've had some afternoon meetings, so it's nice to have a morning meeting. We're all bright and fresh. So welcome back, and to those who are watching on the webcast, we welcome you. Last meeting we had over 100 participating on the webcast. So I'd like to make a couple of introductions this morning and share with you some great progress. We have over 225 individual organizational members of the coalition, and so we're really thrilled that the numbers continue to grow, and we've got lots of diversity in our membership. Are Catherine and Kathy here in the room? Catherine, no. So we had a group of survivor advocates that met for the first hour of the morning, and so we were really glad to have a number of different advocates from across transportation safety issues join this morning. NSA does have a survivor advocates division, and so that's an opportunity for some of them to come together as well as being here at the Road to Zero. Our 225 member organizations are very unique. They span from OEMs to associations. And I see Andy Pilgrim in the back to a race car driver. Andy, thank you for joining us today. And so we're really glad to have so many people committed to getting to zero on our roads. So Susan and Jane, are you all in here? So I just want to give a big shout out to Susan, who many of you all, probably every single one of you, has engaged with, and Jane Terry, who's in our DC office. They and the team are leading the staff work for this effort, and it definitely takes a village. So thank you all for being here. I'm just going to run through a couple of things just to give you a brief update on what we've been doing since we met the last time. We had a scenario development meeting with the RAND Corporation. About 60 different groups participated in that activity. Next, I'm going to give you an update on the Road to Zero grant program, and then finally just give you a brief overview of the agenda this morning. So the scenario development program that we are working on with the RAND Corporation, the first of the meetings that we had here as a coalition, we did a little bit of brainstorming and some information gathering. We had a subsequent meeting with them. It was a 2-day meeting. 60 different groups participated. And really it was focused on brainstorming about long-term scenario development. How do we get to zero in 30 years? What things do we need to do to make that happen? What are some of the risks that will keep us from getting there? And so in the workshop and in the survey that we shared with you all, we asked you to think about possibilities, what you'd like to achieve, and also to look at some of the obstacles of what we'd like to achieve. So thank you all who participated. You're going to hear from Jonathan a little bit later today about some of the survey results. The RAND work continues. That's a long-term view. That's looking out 30 years. But we just want to keep you in the loop that we're going to continue to do that engagement and that work. And we may be coming back to you with some requests on that. The second piece I want to share with you is the grant application period closed last month. And we received over 60 applications totaling over 8 million in requests. We had some fantastic help in reviewers from FMCSA, FHWA, NHTSA, CDC, and NIOSH. So I just want to say thank you. I see some of those reviewers here in the room. It was a lot of work, each application. We wanted to make sure that there were multiple reviews and multiple looks for the ranking and rating of each of the applications. So they were great applications, so I just want to share that with everybody. Really solid. We were excited to see so many high-quality applications. It's going to be hard to pick just a few of them that we'll make awards to. But if nothing else, it demonstrates to us that there's a great need out there, and we want to try to understand what we can do in the future to support more of those initiatives. So today's agenda, we've got a robust agenda, and so we're going to kick it right off this morning. I know many of you all, whether you're a Washington insider or whether you're someone who's visiting in town, last night was the President's State of the Union address. He did talk about infrastructure there, and so we're really fortunate to have some senior staffers from the Hill, particularly on the Senate side, who are going to share their outlook for an infrastructure bill and some of the things that you all might care about. So we're going to start the morning off with a conversation about what's going to happen potentially in Congress. And then we're going to have a briefing by Jonathan Dimbert on the survey results. And so I think that'll be really helpful as we start to talk to each other about what are some of our next steps, what are some of our opportunities in the near term and midterm, as well as some of the things that we're thinking about in the long term. The majority of our day, though, and after that, you're going to hear from Dia. She's one of our steering group members. Dia is going to share with you, we heard a presentation from her at the RAND steering group, and we all said, we've got to bring this to the coalition. It was awesome, and it really helped open a lot of our eyes about EMS. Many of us work in different parts of the transportation system, and Dia's a real powerhouse and can share some great insights with us. And then we're going to spend most of the rest of the time breaking out and doing some group work. We heard you all last time. You really value that opportunity to talk to your peers, to engage, to interact, to do some of that work in smaller group settings. And so we're going to break out and do some of that this morning. And so I'd like to kick things off as we begin today by introducing the moderator for our panel, Ian Grossman, who's the Vice President of Member Services and Public Affairs at the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. So he's going to moderate our panel, introduce the panelists. But for those of you who don't know Ian, Ian's responsible for AMVA's driver licensing, identity management, vehicle and law enforcement programs that support safety and security throughout North America. He leads the association's strategic communications and government affairs efforts. He provides members thought leadership on public policy and outreach, and he is a national leader in transportation safety. He's been a founding member of the Towards Zero Deaths National Highway Safety Strategy, and has also been a founding member of the Road to Zero National Steering Committee. So thank you, Ian, for all the work that you've done since October for the Road to Zero team and for the lifetime of work that you've done for highway safety. Thank you. Come on up.
Thank you, Debbie, for that kind introduction. My mother would be proud if she was watching on the webcam. So I am just opening this up so I can get my notes about our panelists to introduce them. As Debbie mentioned, many of us watched the speech last night, and even prior to the speech, we've heard discussion of a $1 trillion package. It was mentioned again last night, so it's great that we could kick off the Road to Zero meeting this morning with a conversation about what might that really mean, how long might it really take, and most importantly, what does it mean for transportation safety, and how do we make sure that safety can be a core component of any package of any size that might be discussed in Congress. So we have two panelists who have come across town for us. Andrew Wishnia is an attorney and has a long background in public policy, both working on the Hill and in the administration. He is currently, very recently, on detail over to Senate EPW from the Federal Highway Administration. So it'll be great to get Andrew's perspective of seeing now what's happening on the Senate side, but also through the lens of his knowledge from the executive branch. Also with us this morning is Sherry Pascoe, who is a staff member and investigator for the Senate Commerce Committee, where she spends a lot of time advising Chairman Thune on a number of issues. And as we were talking about before we came up here, one of the primary topics that she covers for the committee are the safety issues. So even though I know many of us in other transportation policy policy conversations will say $1 trillion sounds great. The elephant in the room is how are you going to pay for that? What we really want to talk about today is not so much the funding side of the $1 trillion package, but what does it really mean for policymakers, and transportation safety. So with that, we're going to ask Andrew and Sherry to give some brief opening remarks, and hopefully open it up to a very interactive Q&A discussion for the time we have. So we didn't flip a coin before we started, but Sherry, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. Thank you to the National Safety Council and to the Road to Zero for inviting me. It's really, is it working? Great. It's really a pleasure to be here. The Commerce Committee has a number of transportation priorities for this Congress. Our two goals in those priorities include ensuring that government infrastructure spending delivers results for all, and ensuring travel is safer and more efficient for all Americans. So you mentioned infrastructure. Both Congress and President Trump have set the improvement of infrastructure as a top priority, and we're actually going to be holding a hearing this morning to discuss how do we start to improve infrastructure. This Congress, we're also dedicated to reviewing a number of nominees for the Department of Transportation, and we're also working on a bipartisan effort to develop potential legislation for the deployment of self-driving vehicles. We are also, of course, going to continue our oversight of the implementation of the FAST Act. The FAST Act had a number of important highway and vehicle safety provisions that we would like to see fully carried out.
Good morning. Deborah, thank you so much for having me. Jane, thank you for having me. And I was ready to go actually at 5:30 this morning. I have a 10-month-old. So I was fired up, ready to go at 5:30, 6 in the morning, but I had to wait a few hours. Sherry, it's good to be with you as well. So I've been with the committee now for all of 5 weeks, but as was alluded to, I've experienced working for the Obama administration over at the House and now over at the Senate. So this is sort of the triumvirate of experiences. And I can tell you, some things right off the top that the Environment and Public Works Committee is concerned about, first and foremost is nominations. We are interested in terms of sort of a top priority, getting a federal highway administrator, federal co-chairs for the Appalachian Regional Commission, the Delta Regional Commission, an assistant secretary at EDA. All of the nominations are very important to sort of get folks in place. And then secondly, obviously, as you're well aware, we have a $1 trillion infrastructure proposal that was previewed as sort of a blueprint by Senator Schumer. This is the $1 trillion Schumer blueprint infrastructure bill, and we're hoping that we can have some more discussion toward that end. A couple of weeks ago, Senate EPW held a bipartisan hearing, an oversight hearing on infrastructure, and I think you heard at that hearing that direct investment was really something that is sought after by both Republicans and Democrats. What's interesting is the makeup on EPW. You have sort of your coastal Democrats, folks on the East and West Coast, and then you have kind of the square state Republicans, folks that are in the middle of the country. But regardless of sort of where folks are at, I think what you heard is that public-private partnerships are going to be a component of an infrastructure bill, but they can't be an entire infrastructure bill. So what's going to be critical is direct investment. And I think what you heard last night was conservative orthodoxy towards, an infrastructure package, but sort of short on specifics. So we're still sort of in a wait-and-see play with respect to what exactly President Trump is going to propose on the infrastructure end. I suspect that an infrastructure bill will probably not be imminent in 2017. The Republicans have suggested that healthcare reform is something that they're, wanting to prioritize. Tax reform is something that they're wanting to prioritize. And we can talk more about whether we think tax reform fits into an infrastructure bill. I'm, a bit suspicious toward that end, but again, it's sort of wait and see. But in the meantime, we're, excited to, get folks in place at EPW. I was telling a couple of my colleagues that we are still having some folks that are onboarding, some folks that are offboarding from Senator Boxer's staff. So we still need to kind of get fully stepped up. But in the meantime, we're, pedal to the metal, holding hearings and thinking about what the art of the possible is. So look forward to this discussion, and thank you again for having me here today.
I'm going to stand over here so I can see anybody in the room that wants to ask a question. I guess I'll start us off. Obviously, $1 trillion package is the most substantial conversation we've had around a infrastructure investment in some time. Give us a reality check. What are you hearing from the members that you work with and you talk to, regardless of whether it might be months or a year away? What's the reality that we're going to see something comprehensive and substantial in the relative near future?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting that conversation now to kind of determine how long it's going to take and what should be included. The committee is holding a hearing this morning on infrastructure, and from the chairman's perspective, well, the FAST Act authorized, $305 billion over 5 years to fund transportation. Infrastructure is just too important to not remain a critical focus for the committee. So I think we're going to have lots of conversations, particularly throughout the Congress and this morning at our hearing about, what should be included in infrastructure. Does that include roads? Does that include broadband? Does that include water? As well as, starting the conversation as to how you actually fund all of that. I think those are going to be two big topics, but from our perspective, we're really looking forward to delving in and kind of discussing these issues.
Andrew, how does your crystal ball look?
So here's sort of the reality check on my end. And again, I'm speaking from a personal perspective. These shouldn't be attributed to Senator Carper or the committee, particularly since I've only been there for 5 weeks.
You're an expert.
But I think the reality check is this. We have highway and transit programs authorized through 2020. And as we all know, if there's limited pressure to act, then things rarely get done. So what we will need is sort of an inflection point of, the White House and or our majority counterparts to say that this is a priority, to put together, a meaningful proposal, and then to have a discussion around that proposal. But just in terms of, what the FAST Act has done, it's already authorized programs through 2020. The Highway Trust Fund is anticipated to run out in 2020, but it has authorization through 2022. So do we have, enormous problems with respect to the Highway Trust Fund? Absolutely. But I hate to say this, I feel like that's a little bit of an inside the Beltway discussion. Folks, in Main Street don't necessarily care about the pay-fors and moving money from the general fund to the Highway Trust Fund. Folks are concerned about, structurally deficient bridges and functionally obsolete bridges. They're concerned about the fact that 35,000 to 40,000 folks are dying on roadways every year. And so I think, through hearings and roundtables, we're going to hope to drive that point forward. And really tell a story about what it is that that we think an infrastructure bill should comprise in the years beyond.
Great. Questions? Here's your chance to get the insider's view of what might be coming and what they're discussing. We have a microphone in the back of the room. Come on up. Roger's going to start us off.
Sure.
Will you grab the microphone, Roger? Thank you.
As I had listened to the president during his campaign, and as I think you guys remarked, infrastructure is more than roads. It's a big, broad, sort of amorphous definition at this point in time. Can you guys make a WAG as opposed to about what percentage of that $1 trillion might go to roadways or transportation?
I don't think we're there yet to give, a specific percentage. I think that, that's something that we will definitely be having conversations about with different members of Congress and with the president and his administration. But what I will say from what the chairman thinks is that, we see infrastructure as a means to connect the movement of people, the movement of goods, and the movement of information between states and amongst our country. The chairman represents a really rural state. He represents the state of South Dakota. So his interests are primarily looking at, how can we ensure that rural communities aren't left out of the conversation? And so there's a lot of discussion there about, connecting roads, connecting bridges, but also, broadband communication and making sure that people still remain connected in that manner. So we're going to be fighting for kind of a broader definition of infrastructure with a capital I. That's what we like to call it.
So I should have mentioned this before, but since we're still all getting to know each other, when you ask your question, will you just let us know who you are and where you're from to introduce yourselves to the crowd? Adrian?
Hi, I'm Adrienne Gilday with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. You mentioned, one of the goals is to get people moving, help them move more. We want more effective, efficient transportation. And given the recent rise in fatalities on the roads, I think everybody in this room, given we're here for the Road to Zero, are all interested in making sure that safety is a major component. Obviously, we need to invest in our roads and our bridges and our ports and make sure that goods and people can move effectively, but we also have to do it safely.
Yes.
So is there an appetite? Are you guys hearing discussions about making sure that it's not purely funding, building roads, it's also making the infrastructure smarter, more efficient, and more safe? Because that's going to be a push and pull. Everybody's going to want a little bit of this money, right? But we have to make sure that if we are expanding our infrastructure and putting more people on the roadways, that they can be there safely.
Yeah, I think there's obviously economic impacts of deteriorating infrastructure. There's also obviously safety impacts as well. The committee thinks that safety is a priority and it will remain a priority through this Congress. In terms of transportation, we're going to be doing an FAA reauthorization where safety is going to be a key component. We're also committed to working with Senator Peters on developing legislation for the safe deployment of self-driving vehicles. And I think that, when we start to think about self-driving vehicles, it may change how we think about infrastructure as well. We think that self-driving vehicles have tremendous potential for safety. Really, the lives lost on our roads have increased recently, and with the amount due to human error, these vehicles really have a tremendous benefit. We also think they have a tremendous benefit for enhancing mobility and energy efficiency. So we are really going to be looking at this issue and talking to other members, talking to stakeholders about how do we make sure that we do this in a way that kind of reduces hurdles for the deployment of these vehicles, but also, assures public confidence and keeps safety at the forefront.
One fatality is too many, and I think that's something that everyone in this room can agree upon. Do we need a robust highway safety improvement program? Absolutely. Do we need more? Toward your point, Adrian, absolutely. And on the technology front, we have some great opportunities to sort of plus up existing discretionary grants. For example, ATC MTD, the Advanced technology deployment program. That's an opportunity where we can get smarter about deploying connected vehicles, even, charging infrastructure to, to look at the environmental component as well. We have a connected vehicle program at the Federal Highway Administration, where in September of last year, 3 pilot programs in Wyoming, New York, and Tampa were unveiled. We're going to be looking at earnest at how those programs are doing and whether we can scale that to form. So I think technology is something traditionally and naturally that's in the jurisdiction of commerce, but when it affects infrastructure, that should also include the Environment and Public Works Committee, and that's something that Senator Carper is interested in as well.
Hi, Russ Martin, Governor's Highway Safety Association. Hey, I was wondering, could you share any more details or ideas about what direction the autonomous vehicle legislation might take?
Sure. So right now, I know that a lot of folks have been asking for a draft. I don't have a draft yet. It really is going to be built based on input from stakeholders, from the administration, and given that the chairman is involved, he represents the interests of the members of the committee. So we're really going to be having a conversation as to the other senators' priorities as well. I think one of the primary things that we're going to be looking at is what should the federal role be? How do we get NHTSA ready to kind of take on both the development and the testing and the deployment oversight of these vehicles? There's been quite a bit of state action, which is great, but and NHTSA has put out their voluntary guidance, but we really need to think about the current structure that NHTSA has laid out with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. Some of them are old, they're outdated. They weren't built at a time, when we were seeing the future of vehicles that actually can drive themselves. So we really need to think about how do we modernize it, how do we make it more efficient, how do we bring it up to date, and how do we really get NHTSA the expertise that they need to be ready for this. So that's going to be our primary focus.
Great. Someone already have the microphone? Joe?
Yeah. Joe Toole from Kittles and Associates. The natural discussion, I think, a lot of times when we talk about $1 trillion or however much money is, how much is going to go to safety? And you mentioned the HSIEP program and some of the other programs. My question is, how can we begin to lay the foundation that the $1 trillion itself is a safety program? Namely, every dollar spent to improve infrastructure, whether or not pipeline or ports or highways, is being spent to assure that that money is going towards making the safest road possible or the safest infrastructure in any of those possible. And I'm wondering, what could we do to help the committees begin thinking of that way rather than thinking of safety as a separate element?
I think you're probably right. I think that when we talk about infrastructure and safety, sometimes I think, and it may be just a fact that, there's separate committees of Congress that have jurisdiction over these issues, although, in the FAST Act, Commerce and EPW work together very closely to produce the FAST Act. So I think that when we're talking about safe bridges, safe roads, that definitely needs to be part of the conversation.
I guess, though, to Joe's point, how can we help move that conversation? What advice would you give the folks in this room to help the committees and the members come into line with that paradigm?
Yeah, I think that this effort, as both on infrastructure and on our effort on self-driving vehicles, is going to be based on the input of stakeholders. Thus far, we're really looking for your feedback. So please come to us with your priorities, what you think, needs to be most important, as well as educate, other members of the committee. We have quite a few, our committee has grown substantially. We've got quite a few new members with new staff, who are, somewhat green to the issue. So I think education is really key.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sherry. I think it's vital to, have your voice heard on the Hill. In the EPW space, Rebecca Higgins and myself cover transportation and infrastructure issues. So I encourage, everyone in this room and everyone listening on webcast, to talk to colleagues in different associations. Please feel free to come up to the committee on both sides. We're looking to have bipartisan discussions as well. I think it's really important to have your voice heard, to have your story told, to define the issue, and then to present the outcomes of what you see is possible with your proposal. I mean, I think it's that simple in a lot of ways.
Hi, Dick Healing. My claim to fame is I was a board member at NTSB with Debbie Hersman. And during my confirmation hearing, one of the two things that I really emphasized was that I believed I wanted to work very hard on reducing the fatalities on the highway. Otherwise, by any other consideration, that many deaths in a year is an epidemic. And it really was important. Along the way, though, I'm sort of focused on the human factors side of it. And I think most accidents can be attributed to human error. But some of the human error that occurs are related to the infrastructure. And I'm going to refer to things like a person who, because of poor signage, makes a last-minute cut across lanes to exit from a high-speed highway, creating an accident. Or a person who is so confused that they just stop in the middle of the highway and create another kind of an accident. There is a link between the human error and the and the infrastructure, no question. A loss of control if you hit a pothole, loss of control if you're just not paying attention or whatever. But my question really is, has anybody really broken down accidents that are related to infrastructure and then been able to articulate them in a way that we can tell whether it was a human error related to poor infrastructure or whether infrastructure was the primary cause of the accident and there was no way to avoid it? Has anybody done that?
It's probably a question for the room, more so than our policy experts up on the table. Anybody want to take a crack? Mike? Hang on, microphone's coming. Wait for the mic, Mike.
There's a large knowledge base on the relationship of infrastructure and safety. And we have the Highway Safety Manual, which is a great resource that gives you those relationships. We also have the Crash Modification Factors Clearinghouse that shows you if you put in this type of improvement, what the effect's going to be on safety. So there is a large, diverse knowledge base that does exist in this area.
Mike, you mentioned we introduce yourself to the crowd?
Oh, sorry, Mike Griffith, Federal Highway Administration.
Thank you. Great. Other questions for the panel? Did you have one there, sir? Yep.
My name is Eddie DiGirolamo. I'm co-founder of Texting, a vehicle safety company, and I am also a hacker. And the reason why I bring that up is that I hear a lot of emphasis on the self-driving car future of safety. My question is kind of two-parted. One, is it a bit of a far-out holy grail to reach for right now? And is there good scientific data that shows that, A, people want self-driving cars, and B, they're safer? So that was three questions.
Sure. Yeah.
We're going to turn off our phones first, since you're in the room.
No, I also handle cybersecurity for the committee, so when auto cybersecurity issues come up, I get really excited. But I think that you know, there's definitely been tremendous investment from automakers, from technology companies to try to, you know, build better and greater automated systems in vehicles today. I think, you know, we've seen announcements from some companies that they're going to have level 3, you know, automated vehicles by the end of this year, level 4 and 5 by, you know, 2020, 2021. That's really, really soon. You know, the way that NHTSA writes rules, it can take a decade. So we need to be, you know, ready for these vehicles with the anticipation that they will be here sooner than we think. I think in terms of consumer acceptance, that's definitely going to be a challenge. I've definitely seen some studies that show that consumers are a bit skeptical. I've also seen other studies that show that when you actually explain some of the benefits of these vehicles, you know, that they may help to reduce accidents, that they may help to reduce insurance, consumers are actually quite excited about them. And when you see studies of consumers and ADAS systems, you know, consumers love them. I know my mom just bought a system a vehicle that has some of these driver assistance systems, and she literally like cannot stop talking about how awesome they are. So I think once consumers see them and feel them, I think some of that skepticism is taken away. It's just like how no one thought that they ever would want an iPhone when it first came out, and now everyone wants one, and now we have so many different varieties of smartphones, and you know, technology, I think a lot can surprise people.
I think we have time for one more question. Someone, oh, someone's got.
Quick follow-up. So in terms of getting the awareness around the benefits of AVs, will the House help with that? I'm in the technology, Jason Samuels, possible, another vehicle safety.
I'm sorry, by who help with that? Anybody?
Yeah.
I think that, you know, I think that it really is, it's a responsibility of everyone. It's definitely a responsibility of the manufacturer to let consumers know how their vehicle operates and what the benefits are, as well as the limitations. I also think that, you know, there might be a role for the government in terms of education. That's definitely a conversation that we're going to be having going forward as we kind of produce legislation.
Great.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wolleber from the Transportation Trades Department at the AFL. I was wondering if you guys could speak to sort of the new regulatory atmosphere we're working in. I guess when I think of improving safety, I think of legislators sort of directing the agencies to implement regulations that, you know, improve safety. Now we have an executive order and, you know, interagencies task forces that are supposed to limit regulations or repeal those before implementing new ones. And so I'm sort of wondering, you know, if you move forward, if there is an infrastructure bill, and if a big piece of this is focused on safety, sort of what limitations do you see exist, and to what extent can legislators sort of fill those roles that I think traditionally, at least I think of regulators playing?
Sure. I mean, NHTSA is obviously a safety regulator. They write federal motor vehicle safety standards, and they have a robust enforcement program for compliance and for recalls and making sure that vehicles are safe. I also think that the way that regulations work and how quickly technology, you know, how long they take to draft and how quickly technology is changing, that regulations alone are probably not going to be sufficient. If you look at the way that NHTSA was able to voluntarily get all of the manufacturers to agree to AEB, that's a great step forward. I also think that, you know, while there is quite a bit of focus on vehicle safety, the work on human factors and highway safety and drunk driving, distracted driving, seatbelt use, you know, all of the work that happens in the partnership between federal government and the states is also important as well. So I think it's important to not lose sight of you know, all of the different components and kind of different ways to address a safety issue.
If you're up on the Hill now, you'll hear about the Congressional Review Act, the CRA, and I've probably heard more about the CRA in the past 5 weeks than in the previous 20 years since President Clinton, signed that bill. As so that was used one time prior to the Trump administration, and I think we've already started to see more of a proliferation of that use. And I think we have to be, concerned about some of the potential rollbacks that folks are thinking about with respect to the CRA, not just the CRA regs specifically, but as some folks may not fully be aware of, anytime you have something substantially similar, so if you have a substantially similar regulation, that would get rolled back as well, and Congress wouldn't be able to enact superseding legislation or regulation. So I think that's concerning, from our perspective. And then from the safety side specifically, I think if you look at, a space like performance management, we have performance measures for, fatalities and serious injuries now. HSP and FHWA targets have to be provided identically. That's not to say that there's necessarily scuttlebutt about PM1, getting rolled into a CRA. But I think, there's been some discussion about, sort of the performance management regime more broadly. And I think that's something that we want to be protective of and seek to be proactive.
So, excuse me, as we wrap up this panel, you are more than welcome to stay with us the rest of the day to hear the conversation. I also know you probably have some busy activities to get back to on the Hill. And as you go back there, please, as you work with your colleagues on the committees and as you begin to educate and brief the members, please let them know that even though this is a newer effort, this Road to Zero effort in the fall, this is a coalition of already over 200 organizations and quickly growing that is ready to help and really expects that whatever package that we look like really can take a real step forward in eliminating this significant preventable cause of death in roadway crashes. And so we are here to help the committees, to help the members, to make sure that safety really is the top priority in any bill that gets created. So with you taking that message, please join me in thanking Andrew and Sherry for joining us this morning. And Debbie, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. We look forward to working with you. The group's going to come up with some concepts and some thoughts today, and we'll definitely follow up with you. So we next, just to keep us on schedule, we have a fantastic asset in the National Safety Council with Jonathan Dimbert. Jonathan worked with Susan and the team to put out a survey to the coalition members, to the steering group, to the people who participated in the RAND survey. And it's my pleasure to introduce him to share some of those results with you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation about how we set our priorities as an organization. Jonathan, come on up. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Debbie. Many of you had a chance to participate in this survey, and those of you that didn't, we're happy to share the results with you. Okay. For those on the phone, my name is Jonathan Dimbert. I'm with the marketing research portion of the council, and I get to do lots of different efforts to help us understand the many different ways the council is working on eliminating preventable deaths. This is my kind of first round of exposure to the Road to Zero effort, and it's been quite a pleasure to review this data and to get to know some of you yesterday, and looking forward to today. Let's see. So just by way of background, this survey was conducted amongst a wide group of coalition members and those interested. Specifically, we had a few representatives completed from the steering group, from the workshop attendees at the last RAND workshop, members of the coalition, and those that are part of the coalition but not yet members. And our big objective was try to understand what are the priorities, what's important going forward for the Road to Zero group. So jumping in, one of the first questions we asked was, what 3 traffic safety issues do you feel the coalition could address most quickly? And that was an open-ended opportunity. And what we've done here is take a look at everything that was written, give it some codes, and kind of put it back into this picture that gives you a sense of what's coming up most often. So as you're looking at that, I can kind of help you see the detail. Distraction is the biggest thing on this page. That's 34% of you told us that that was something important. Right around the same level as impairment issues, followed up with culture. And that's a kind of broad one that gets into lots of different pieces, but we'd like to change the driving culture in the United States, either at the public level, at the governmental level, at the regulatory level, lots of different expressions of that. But all of those kind of pieces. And then a lot of other issues are up here. The speeding, technology, pedestrian issues, seatbelts, training, goes on in terms of issue. And I think that's important. You guys certainly are sensing this, but it's a good illustration of the breadth of complexity of this issue, all the different factors that come in to road safety. The next one is a little bit more of a closed-ended question. How interested are you in each of the following areas as potential topics for future discussions at meetings like this? So here it's a little clear to see. Public health approaches was at the top, which was interesting to me, but I think a number of you can get a sense of why that's important. Right with it is local government traffic safety programs. That's a lot of illustration of what's happening at some local areas that we could learn a little bit more about and find a way to take it forward in our discussion. Infrastructure investment, a huge area for everybody to be talking about. Enforcement challenges, roadway design. And again, I wanted you to just see the breadth of issues. And what we're doing with this is information that'll be in front of the planners as we move forward to try to make sure we're focused on the right issues, we're talking about the right topics. The next one is we asked about the creation of specific work groups amongst the coalition. Would people be interested in participating in those? So 91% of you who completed the survey expressed interest in working with those kind of groups. So kudos to everybody for not only being part of the coalition as a whole, but for saying, you know, I'm ready to take that next step and get a little bit deeper into the issues. In terms of what topics those work groups should be covering, again, we see a huge breadth of issues. Technology here rises to the top, and I think there's a lot of aspects of that, and it breaks up into a lot of interesting areas. But just to give you kind of a sense of the spread, that's 20% of you said, I'm interested in that. So the biggest topic is really only 1/5, which is probably good for specific breakout groups. But again, it has this huge range. Vulnerable users came in at about 16%, infrastructure and design, 15%, distracted communication planning, kind of what some people might call a PSA or an ad campaign, kind of with training and other educational activities is another group that came in at 15%, impaired and culture. And then we get into smaller, less than 10% kind of groups that you see are all over as kind of issues. So we're not exactly seeing true commonality between these different expressions of the same kind of thing, but it's a great illustration, again, of the breadth and helps us kind of zero in what's good for presentation, what's good for a workout group, what's something we should make sure we're focusing on together. And the fourth question I want to share with you is in the area of countermeasures. We asked about what kind of countermeasures do you support moving on? And specifically the question was, how strongly would you support or oppose the enactment of a countermeasure or increased visibility in the following areas? So there's a list we put together. It's not all inclusive by any stretch, but we wanted to get a good breadth and representation of issues. And what you're seeing here is the percentage of people who strongly agree or somewhat agree. And together they give us a sense, you can see we're in favor of just about every kind of countermeasure we discussed at a high level. If you look at the orange, it gives us a little bit more discrimination as we look at just the strongly agrees. So distracted driving at the top of this list, drugged and drunk driving, improved infrastructure, seatbelt laws, speeding, initiatives that protect vulnerable road users. And then we're into slightly less ones, but they're all still really important. What we're going to do now is a little bit more depth. After this question, we said, okay, you said you strongly support that area. What kind of things are you looking for? And again, we had an open-ended question opportunity for people to fill in some of those details. And I've read through that and done at a very high level, grouping of ideas in very similar kind of groupings across the board, but you can kind of see how they lay out differently by issue. And my hope is that we break out today gives you a little extra food for thought on what we can do on various issues. So let's go through a couple of the most supported ones. Distracted driving, for example. So you'll see very similar charts for all the issues we're going to go through, but the percentages change a little bit. So here, education and culture kind of changes are the biggest kind of comments we saw, with about 36% of the people who supported that idea saying some kind of comment in that area. They think that's what it's going to take to make movement in distracted driving, is some kind of educational component. Equally, well, not quite equally, a little bit less important, technology solutions, 26%. And in this area, that can come from jamming devices. It can come from literally stopping your phone from working on its own, or giving you more technology to correspond to people. Lots of variety of what kind of technology we're talking about, but anything in the technology area is in that bubble. And then legislative solutions, 20%. And enforcement is pretty close to that, but different. It's about actually stepping up the enforcement rather than the rule. We already have the rule, we're ready for the enforcement, or stiffer punishments kind of fall into that category. And in this area, there is a call for more research and data, but less so than some of the others. So that's 9%. And these are familiar kind of buckets for you guys, I'm sure. We hear talk of the 3, the 4, the 5 E's. You can really relabel these however you want, but I wanted them to be kind of areas of strength. So that's distracted. For drugged and drunk driving, it's a little bit different. Education and culture change is still kind of the big call out, but also enforcement and punishment here is seen as more acceptable and more appropriate for this issue versus distracted. We're more in favor of that as a group. And then technology is in about the same place, and legislative and research data falling behind. Improved infrastructure, which we're going to talk about obviously a lot today. So here it's a bit more of a complex picture. Road design is the area that most people want to talk about, 20%. And underneath that are some other breakout issues I just wanted to call out, because road design is so complex in its specifics and involves so many different perspectives from the kind of comments you guys made in the survey. So signage came up, maintenance and inspection and kind of issues, keeping the roads up to date, vehicle information sharing, V2I, and those vulnerable users, making sure we protect them. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that color of, yes, we need to work on road design, but what aspect of road design? Let's get specific in our conversations to understand where we think the countermeasures are going to make the most impact. Education, culture change, very similar to what you think in general for the public, but also here we're talking about how do I get other people in government, other people in road design to be actually taking into account the factors that are most impactful for safety. So maybe I have to educate some other audiences or make sure they're working together, which is what that little bubble about collaboration is really about, that we need a lot of people working together who maybe right now are too independent to be able to solve this issue fully. Enforcement and punishment, not really relevant. Research and data here, a little less relevant. But this funding area obviously is very important, as we were just talking about. And where's that money going to come from? Some people are focusing on the federal level. Some people are focusing on the state level. Some are talking about the removal of restrictions that allow states to do what they need to do on this issue. So again, a lot of complexity here for you to tease out in your discussions. One more, seatbelt laws and call-out. 31% around education, cultural change. We know that people are wearing, well, a large number of people are wearing their seatbelts in that front seat, but there's a lot more to do for the rest of the driving situations, back seats, passengers in other kinds of vehicles. So education was a clear call out here, and legislative solutions and enforcement, which kind of go hand in hand. Technology, just a little bit, the sense that maybe the car shouldn't start if the seatbelt is not buckled. There's similar kind of innovations that would encourage the behavior more. And then lastly, I think, is speeding. Maybe we have one more. So again, a little bit of a complex issue in the spread here. Legislation, 20%. Technology, 20%. Maybe the car literally shouldn't be able to go faster. Or maybe I can do things in the area of road design to influence the speeds that people are comfortable driving. And a lot of specific call-outs from people, ones that stick in my head, were maybe narrowing lanes or narrowing things which to my uneducated ear sounded, whoa, that sounds dangerous. But I get where we're going. If you can literally change my comfort zone on the road, then maybe you change my behavior. education, cultural change, making sure people understand the impacts of those issues. And enforcement and punishment obviously has a component of making sure we're following those rules. I should mention also technology. This is an area where automated cameras and automated enforcement techniques also were discussed pretty heavily. So I think that that's it. We have a little bit more data, but these are the ones that I think are important to keep in your minds today. If there are any questions, I have just a couple of minutes. If not, we wish you guys a great day and good luck in exploring all these issues. Anything? Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll hand it back over to Debbie for the next piece.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And Jonathan also helped lead some of the work that we did last week with our fatalities estimate announcements and driver behaviors. And so we'll look to dig a little bit deeper into that data when it makes sense. Our next speaker is Dia Gaynor. Dia is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Emergency Medical Service Officials. She's worked for 2 EMS offices for 27 years. And during that time, she's led innovative efforts to advance EMS and forge strong relationships with the transportation community. And in 2016, she was named one of the most influential women in EMS. And we are lucky to have her here today.
Oh, I'm supposed to get started here. Well, thanks, Debbie. How do I respond to that? I want to warn everyone, I have had no coffee this morning. So I'm going to be more subdued than usual. But I really am so honored to be able to provide this presentation to you. For those of you who may have seen it at our workshop, have changed up the content a bit, and I'm hoping that my presentation appears on the screen shortly. But I did work in 2 state EMS offices, the state of Maryland and the state of Idaho for those long 27 years, 19 of which was as the state EMS director in Idaho. And I can't describe the culture shock moving from Baltimore to Boise. But when I was offered the executive director job for NASEMSO, our members are the state offices that regulate, educate, engineer, and improve EMS systems, the ambulance services, trauma systems, et cetera. I said, you know, I'll be wherever the meeting is in the country, wherever you need me to be, but I'm not moving back east. And so I do the ultimate telecommute from Boise. I think we had 1 murder last year. So I'm here to share some really important insights with you about emergency medical services and to distinguish very deliberately between the more generic reference to emergency response that's commonly used and emergency medical services specifically. And I thought I'd use this sign. This is a real sign located on a county road about 45 miles north of my home. Ignore the bullet holes. And what the county is doing is saying, look, and this is the second biggest road in this county. Look, you go down this road, do not expect stop signs, do not expect yield signs. There is no striping. In fact, most of it's not even paved. All right, but it's the second biggest road in the county. And so be advised, moving forward, this effort that we're engaged in has a sign like this right up front, that we don't know what's ahead of us. We don't know what we should expect at any turn, and be prepared for anything. I would be remiss if I didn't make sure that everyone in the audience is familiar with Haddon's matrix. I know that most of you see yourselves in places across the top row, dealing with speeding issues, seatbelt laws, infrastructure issues like guardrails, median, and so forth. Emergency medical services, by and large, lives in the bottom row, post-event. So until we're here discussing 0 crashes or 0 injuries, the post-event phase in Haddon's matrix is a critical consideration, and I'll share a couple reasons with you why in a second. And the really cool thing about Haddon's matrix is that Dr. Haddon was the first administrator of NHTSA, and he was a physician, and he got it. And so I just want to make sure this is something that's still in everybody's resource folder. We can deal with very simple incidents: single car rollover, single victim, we need one police car, we need one fire truck, we need one ambulance. That's emergency response, getting to the scene and handling safe, quick clearance. We also have to address wickedly complicated crashes with multiple victims, with multiple emergency response organizations, and also factors that start really distinguishing emergency medical services from the rest of the emergency response industry by virtue of the rest of what has to happen for that victim to save their life. And here that's indicated by the presence of the helicopter for which the road's conveniently being closed for it to land. And I say that a little tongue-in-cheek because I know my state transportation department friends can't stand roads being closed. It's a complicated issue. But emergency medical services takes off from that point, and this is a diagram that the World Health Organization produced fairly recently, showing that from the scene forward, there's a whole lot that goes on that is not really visible to the rest of the world, nor is the rest of the emergency response industry even involved. And that beginning with certainly bystander care, critical, but also the advice provided to the bystanders about how to care for the patient until an emergency medical response organization arrives, the transport of the ambulance, ground versus air, transport and handoff of the patient to providers. Wait, which hospital should we go to? I'll talk about the importance of that in just a second. This is a lot of moving parts that are not publicly or readily visible, that have to be highly coordinated, classified, categorized, rigorized, if you will, to adequately care for a severely injured patient to give them any chance of survival. So we view ourselves, emergency medical services, as your safety net. Until prevention is 100% successful, either keeping a crash from happening in the first place or keeping somebody from being so seriously injured that the clock becomes their biggest enemy and will be the cause, the elapsed time will be their cause of death. These are the things we focus on. The ability to detect that an incident has happened, especially in high-risk rural locations. Access to 911, the ability for one or more devices to successfully connect or even have a wireless signal to be able to alert authorities with the capability of dispatching. Next generation 911 systems. Talk about critical infrastructure. Being able to text a 911 center. Let's get real. That's only possible in a few select locations in the United States right now. The on-scene medical care, the clinical capabilities of the emergency medical personnel, the triage system, how do they distinguish between, is this person really injured or not so really injured? I mean, right now we're leaving that to police officers on reports and banking on it, but we expect more structure and clinical sophistication in the form of the medical personnel to assess that and decide where to take the patient and how to take the patient. Ground versus air are critically different, and access to trauma centers. I'm going to take a big risk here. This is 2 minutes long, and I think you'll be pretty surprised at its content, especially when I reveal to you who developed this.
You may not think of it as a public health issue, but did you know that trauma is the leading cause of death in the United States for those aged 46 and under? Traumatic injuries occur every day from events such as gun violence, car crashes, and falls. Multiple casualty events such as those in Sandy Hook, Boston, and San Bernardino have increased in frequency. Since 2001, approximately 2 million Americans have died from trauma. Roughly 1 in 5 deaths from trauma, or 30,000 per year in the U.S., may be preventable if appropriate and timely medical care is delivered after injury. Yet there is great variation in the quality of trauma care and outcomes for injured patients across the United States. In fact, the chances of dying can vary as much as twofold, depending on where you were treated. In other words, where you were injured may determine whether you survive. Innovations in military trauma care, such as redesigned tourniquets, have contributed to unprecedented survival rates for service members wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. Translating military innovations and best practices into the civilian sector could help save tens of thousands of lives in a single year. Patients and the public can help to improve trauma care. In the initial moments after an injury occurs, you as a bystander can deliver immediate life-saving care before EMS personnel arrive. If you have been seriously injured, be engaged in decisions about your care as much as possible so that providers can consider your preferences, life circumstances, and values. Patients, families, and other caregivers can participate in processes that work to improve trauma care, including trauma research. A report from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine says that zero preventable deaths after injury and best possible recovery is an achievable aim to benefit those the nation sends into harm's way in combat, as well as every American. Learn more at nationalacademies.org/trauma care.
And they weren't referring to this initiative. The report published by NASEM and down the hall from TRB at the Institute of Medicine, although they have just changed their name, I don't understand why, published a 531-page report calling for a national trauma system. I'm going to worry what inappropriate YouTube is going to start next, so I'm panicking a little bit. Just looking at one of those, I'm a little worried. Severed body part. Let me move on. I may need a rescue here. So right next door to TRB, this report was published last summer. It calls for a national trauma care system. Look at that title, to achieve zero preventable deaths after injury. Their first summit had as many people in the room as this room, as are here now. I and one person from NHTSA were the only people at both meetings. We have a bunch of friends we need to meet, or I'd like to take you to meet or bring here to meet you. This is critical, and that video is a product of this initiative, and it was produced by the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma. They have a couple recommendations I'm going to go through very quickly so you're aware of the direction they're going, and hopefully so you can see that in that post-event phase, there's key differences that can be made. And what's important about these recommendations is that they're stating what does not exist today, that there should be a national aim set by the White House to achieve zero preventable deaths after injury and minimizing post-trauma-related disability. Anybody disagree with that? Also, that HHS should designate and fully support an authority to lead a sustained effort to achieve the national aim of zero preventable deaths after injury. It doesn't exist today. There's no federal lead agency for trauma. Yet name any other disease, and there is. Second part of this recommendation, that it should be fully participatory across not only governmental partners, non-governmental organizations, private sector, research. There are many, many individuals that need to gather around the same table for this purpose and to look at the entire spectrum from that point of injury to return to function. And there was a very delicate issue that was being addressed in the video about life choices and participation in care decisions, and that's because there are patients who can be saved, but into what condition? And we have to ask ourselves some pretty tough questions. But here's a really important fact, that thanks to NHTSA looking at a 5-year rolling average, not everyone is killed instantly. Not all car crash victims or individuals struck by vehicles are dead at the scene. The clock is their biggest enemy because trauma is a disease and surgery is the cure. So even if a repairable injury persists without surgical intervention, at the cellular level, that patient will die. I won't go into the details. It's called the trauma triad. The person is dying at a cellular level that can't be repaired. It's all about the clock. That's why we're so focused on rapid response. That's why EMS has begun utilizing helicopters at an unprecedented rate. That's why states have the designated or legislative mandate to designate trauma centers. That's also why, and this is a case example, look how fresh it is from just February 19th, that in northern Alabama, that's Lauderdale County that was referenced in that article, about helicopters automatically being launched based on criteria the 911 center uses from what the caller describes. If the car rolled over, if anyone was ejected, if someone is dead at the scene and others are still living. Launch the helicopter. Don't wait for the ambulance. That county is 60-some miles wide. Don't wait for the sole ambulance to have to drive 32 miles to realize, wow, these people are really injured. Do the auto launch. Further, in Alabama, as a result of the state trauma plan managed by the state EMS office, that ambulance service can call a centralized communication center in Birmingham, and that communication center is not a 911 center. They're there just for the ambulances, and they continuously monitor the beds and trauma capabilities of every major facility within driving or flying range of that incident. And they advise the ambulance service which is the best hospital to go to. And there's a lot of choices to be made because, I'm sorry about the contrast not being very good. If the patient's a burn patient, they've got to go to Birmingham. But if the patient is a pediatric patient, they need to go to a different hospital in Birmingham. If they're an adult patient, but not so severely injured, they should go to Tupelo so as not to take up beds in the higher level trauma centers that are equidistant from that location. How is any stray EMT or paramedic going to know all that information otherwise? Unless that communication center or some kind of technology is monitoring those facility capabilities and beds. And otherwise, the EMT may very well, without the state's regulation of that practice and making those resources available, that EMT or paramedic in beautiful downtown Florence might easily just shrug and say, I'll take him to Decatur, not knowing any different. So, ironically, and I want to just one more thing on this slide, and then I'll get through the rest of this very quickly. Ironically, in Tennessee, they have the same kind of triage criteria that Alabama does. In fact, from the same source, it was generated by CDC several years ago, but they have no communication center set up to monitor hospital bed status. So it is on the back and the shoulder and the brain of the individual EMT or paramedic to figure out the right place and way to take that patient. And further, and the Mississippi State EMS director gave me permission to say this so that nobody tried to tell her I threw her under the bus at this presentation. In Mississippi, none of the above. No standardized triage protocol that all EMS personnel are required to use. Therefore, no standardization to when to drive, when to fly. Therefore, no trauma destination criteria for which patient goes to which hospital, and no communication center to stitch it all together. So three intersecting states, all three completely different, and in 2 out of 3 incomplete approaches. These are the areas of the country in which if you are injured severely in a car crash and need to get to a trauma center, only the green areas are a 1-hour drive or less. Remember, time is your biggest enemy after being severely injured. So if you're going to crash, stay in those green areas, please. Let's be fair. If a helicopter is available, here are the 1-hour response areas. Still, we got a lot of voids. Anybody still curious about the rural death disparity? Is Adrian from IIHS here? I'd like to run these numbers, and that is the proliferation of air medical services. We haven't had the resources to check this ourselves, but we think part of the decline prior to this increase may in fact be a result of the increased availability and quality of helicopters. So if we're going to start thinking future, who knows? Maybe we'll have ambulance drones. Maybe we'll have, and we know this is feasible. We did a test. We did a proof of concept of this in a western rural state. What if we connected all the advanced automated collision notification systems to the 911 centers so that they would receive a download of the telematics data and know the probability of severe injury and automatically relay that to the first due ambulance. But today what happens is one organization owned by GM makes a telephone call to what they think is the right 911 center and volunteers this information, which they anecdotally report is generally dismissed as unnecessary by the 911 dispatcher. What about all the wearables? And this too is if not already available in some form, imminent. Both sensors that may be on or close to your body that detect something has happened to you, to the utilization in the field of high technology devices to monitor, especially in multi-casualty situations, monitor multiple patients and changes in their status simultaneously. But as we continue to look towards the future, we have to anticipate the consequences. So with the example of the utilization of helicopters, there's a problem. Their rates are unregulated, thanks to the fact that they were probably unknowingly included in the Airline Deregulation Act. So state insurance commissioners, state EMS offices cannot control what they bill the patient. And $50,000 has been the sort of the standard reference across the country. We've also heard some as high as $80,000 and $90,000. Got to think about the consequences. And while states may consider some means of relief, the fact is the ADA, the Airline Deregulation Act, is crystal clear on this point. So we have to figure these things out. I'll close by just sharing another consequence, and this gets to that delicate issue, and we're going to have to talk about this eventually, and that is life saved, but in what quality? This is Robert. He was struck by a truck in Boise, Idaho, in a heavily populated area. The incident was detected immediately. The ambulance was very close. He was very close to a high-quality hospital. His life, obviously, unquestionably saved. Let's see. I think I see a rusty EMT in the back of the room. Hi, John. Do you remember the medical mnemonic we'd call out if we suspected that somebody was C4? Breathe no more. If the fourth cervical spine is fractured, it affects the nerves that control the diaphragm. The individual can no longer breathe on their own. The problem is Robert was 10 when he was struck by that truck. And he is in a hunger strike in this photograph on the front page of the life section of our newspaper because of the dismal conditions in which he was forced to live. Once he was extricated from this facility, the next closest one that could care for his complex needs was 425 miles away. It's tough on his mother. But we've got to navigate this road. We've got to figure out the tough, not only technical and institutional and infrastructure, but also healthcare, health ethics, and ultimately back to basic emergency medical services issues. So we know that we can't build a trauma center on every corner. We know we cannot have a helicopter manned and ready to fly every 5 to 10 miles. And the only way then we can overcome that evil clock is technology. Hopefully every middle school kid in the future knows how to use a tourniquet. Maybe they even take an emergency medical responder, a 40 clock hour long class instead of CPR, because the likelihood of them dealing with a trauma victim is greater than them encountering somebody in cardiac arrest. What if all the equipment was kind of standard for saving somebody else's life with some very basic interventions? What if we could do very robust records linkage to include not only the hospital discharge data, the trauma registry data, the death certificate data, and the coroner's report? Let's get to the bottom of what's actually killing people, because it's inappropriate to say his cause of death was distracted driving. That was the cause of the crash. The cause of death was the bleeding in his brain, the collapsed lung, the crushed pelvis. We have to get to the bottom of this. And we would make an appeal, we'd love to make an appeal, we'd love to learn how to make an appeal to NTSB to always look at the EMS response after any fatal crash, because it is entirely possible there were preventable deaths. So the future we're developing is of great importance. I can't overstate that. And we're all for preventing the crash. But the preventable deaths is something that we'd like your help in addressing. And the fact is, the benefits of better trauma care are very real and very measurable. And any ideas about how to better align that post-crash community and that army that's standing up under the leadership of the American College of Surgeons. And I don't know if you've ever encountered surgeons, but they're tough cookies. And they're pissed. So how we can better align our efforts would be welcome. Thank you. I don't have a timepiece, so I don't know if I have time for questions. Somebody make a face at me if not. Oh, good. Okay, yes, sir. Here comes a microphone.
Thank you. I'm Vijay Dixit. I'm from Shreya Dixit, chairman of and founder of Shreya Dixit Memorial Foundation in Minnesota. My daughter was killed by a distracted driver. And she was not taken to the helicopter was sent back because they could not work on her because she was too far away from the University of Medical Center. Anyway, she's gone, but you mentioned something in the last but one slide. Every middle school should know about this, should be educated. And you had it in the future. Why future? In our foundation, we've been working with teenagers at the senior level, and we are creating actually an interesting model which learns from this trauma center, sending those students, teenagers, to a trauma center. Now, all your presentation was about saving those lives, but our focus is teaching those kids what happened to that person, how did that person die, what could have been done. And so that knowledge I'm bringing into what we call the distraction-free driving clubs in the state of Minnesota. And I thought it's not future, it is today, and we are trying to do that. And I would like to seek your support to offer some insights, not here, but maybe at a later date, offline, that how we could build that program, which we are starting just in the last couple of months. And we are working with universities and we are working with regular trauma center. The issue that we are facing is that the trauma centers run by private hospitals will not take students because they don't have any time for learning. However, educational institutions, medical centers probably have that ability and they will be more receptive. So I need some guidance on that.
Sure. Very quickly, the future aspect is that it's universal, all middle schoolers. There are certainly pockets of excellence that are reaching out today, but universal requirement. I mean, just like algebra.
Hi, Dia. It's Diane Fendia from the Emergency Medical Service for Children's Program, their Innovation and Improvement Center, which is based at Baylor. We were very excited to be part of this group, and I was delighted to hear your speech right now because you emphasize the fact preventable deaths will never occur at a zero level because injury prevention doesn't work at a zero level. You have to have that safety net. And the fact that we're discussing infrastructure and trauma systems are not part of that infrastructure, or we're not in the discussion this morning, is a huge void. And so I strongly encourage the congressional folks, when they think about infrastructure, it's not just the technology for automatic cars, that you also consider the infrastructure to respond to those incidents where prevention didn't occur. so that, in fact, the trauma system is there to support. And when you talk about multi-casualty, think about the Boston Marathon and all of those individuals who were injured there. They could not all go to one hospital and one trauma center to take care of them. So there has to be a central dispatch or a central communication system to help with that. So thank you very much for emphasizing that, because we have to work together. Trauma systems have been around, for about 35 years now. We have them established in each state. They are working very hard together, but the reality of it is we have to work with you all, and if we're going to address one of those big causes of trauma, motor vehicle crashes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, in fact, in the vehicle that drove into the crowd in near New Orleans over Mardi Gras, that ambulance service is one of the most sophisticated in the country. They have a system in place that strategically distributed those victims to 7 different facilities based on their acuity level. And that we cannot say as an EMS industry is universal.
Hi, Dia.
Good morning, Mr. Montes.
Good morning. My name is John Montes. I'm from the National Fire Protection Association and formerly Boston EMS. So thank you for highlighting Boston, my hometown. So one of the things that Dia highlighted this morning that I'm very curious about is who here thought of EMS as first responders or the fire department and didn't think of it as a separate entity before you heard this speech this morning? Did you think it was just part of a bigger group, or did you think of it as its own thing? Show of hands, who thought it was just part of the group? So a few people. That's the interesting thing, is that EMS is really the third branch of your public safety, but it's also where your public health and your medical needs are met through that branch of public safety. And I think it's very important to consider that when you look at events like this and when you look at reducing deaths, because it's its own thing. It may be done by the fire service or by a private ambulance or volunteers. It's done differently everywhere. If you've seen one, congratulations, you've seen one. But it's its own thing. And I think it's really important for this room to understand that, and for those that make policy to understand that EMS is very complex, and it's part of a huge system, and it meets and connects several huge systems, like the emergency world with the medical world. So super important, and thank you, Dia. That was a great talk.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of you.
Dia, thank you very much for your presentation. And, when we talk about infrastructure, I think definitely my eyes have been opened since we started the Road to Zero Coalition, and even conversations this morning. We're talking about communications and response and all of the different pieces. When we talk about infrastructure, we're going to break out and talk about some things that you all might like to see in the infrastructure bill. One of the things I was struck by when I spoke with Dia yesterday was when we do things that are really great on the infrastructure side, she uses an example of putting in miles and miles of cable barriers. Really, really great when we're trying to prevent cross-median or crossover crashes. But Dia shared a perspective and said that might mean that the ambulance service and the emergency personnel have to drive 20 miles out of their way to get to the crash victim on the other side of the interstate. And so we definitely want to have all the right component parts and the right people in the room to be talking about what some of the great things that we can do, but also how we need to think about how we work together to create a safer system. And I think the congressional panel this morning was a great leadoff for us. It's about thinking about how all of these things mix, and a great call out, how to create a perception that everything that we do in an infrastructure bill needs to be about safer systems, creating a safer world for all of us to live in. And so we've got a great charge. Each of you, when you came in, you had a name tag. On the back of your name tag, there's a number. So we're going to break out into 6 groups. Oh, I'm sorry. It's on the bottom of your name tag. That was an eye test for those of you who are looking down. So there's 4 papers around the room. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 are out in the ante room. And so we're going to go ahead and break now, and we're going to focus on what you would like to see in the infrastructure bill. And the facilitators are going to be some of our steering group members, and then we'll get back together and report out. So go ahead and break out.